Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Well, if you're here with us once again, that means you're in the seats with. Thank you for joining us on the latest episode of our podcast where we talk to various industry professionals about upcoming current projects, the business in general, and so very much more. And just a reminder to always subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or on Podomatic. And also you can find us on our YouTube channel at In the Seats and follow us on all social platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at In the Seats. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about Stuntwomen, the Untold Hollywood Story, a new documentary out on VOD right now from our friends at Shout Studios. And it is from director April Wright, based on the book by Molly Gregory, and it really is a fascinating look at the history of stunt women in the business of Hollywood, going all the way back to 1914, and just seeing the highs and the lows and the trials and the tribulations that stunt women have and still have to go through to be sort of accepted as equals with their stunt male counterparts. But we got a chance to sit down and talk with director April Wright about all these things and so very much more. And well, that's it for me. I hope you enjoy and take a listen.
Well, obviously, first off, thank you for the time today. I genuinely appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, I guess walk me through, because, I watched the film. I absolutely loved it. But it was a book? Like, walk me through sort of discovering the book of this story.
Yeah, so a woman named Molly Gregory has written a few different books about Hollywood. And so this was one of them. And a producer I know, Marion Rosenberg, and a couple other producers had optioned the book. And so Marion had talked to me about wanting to possibly make it into a documentary. And I had done documentaries about drive-in movie theaters was the first one I did. And then I did another one about movie palaces, which is actually coming out in October on VOD finally. And so I had done other sort of obscure angles of cinema history. And so this was the same, except for this one, because it's, an ongoing profession and it's a physical profession. My take on it was that I really wanted to bring the book alive. And the book also stopped around 2007. So I had to do some additional research to pull it all the way into the present and make sure we included some of the top stunt women that are working today. And so I had the idea of just having some of the younger stunt women meet the living legends so that we could hear some of the stories that are in the book. And there were a lot of stories that we got that weren't in the book once we got these ladies talking. So it's based on the book as sort of a jumping off point, and Molly did an incredible amount of research that really helped. And then we just brought it into the present. And I also didn't want to have a talking head documentary, like like I said, I wanted to make an action documentary. And so that's what we set out to make. And that's why, you see a girl getting set on fire and drift car, racing and all these things that we put into the film to make sure it wasn't boring.
No, for sure. And when you're, obviously with something like this, you can have a structure, you can set everything up, but how much of the filmmaking process really comes down to, okay, someone's telling a story and the camera's on, please keep going. Don't run out of hard drive space. Go.
Well, the way that I approach it, I do an incredible amount of research. Well, even go back a step before that. I think really critically with all my documentaries about who should be telling the story and making sure that I have a good mix of different points of view and perspectives. So that's kind of the first thing, is just figuring out, how can we get to the whole story and what different points of views should be represented. And so that's part of it, is just sort of targeting who should help tell the story. And you can't have everybody in the film, even though there's a lot of wonderful stunt women that are not in the film. We still want it to be their story and reflect their point of view. So, you try to be inclusive that way. And then the second is I do a lot of research before every person that we meet with, whether, we were sitting down and talking to them like we did with some of the legends, or whether we were, watching them perform. I do my research, so I know who they are and what they've done, and I have good questions prepared. And so everybody, before we got to them, they received, a list of my questions so that they would know what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
And then once we're there, yes, we had younger stunt women meeting older stunt women to learn the story, but I was there, shaping the interview, the questions, and sort of helping us dig a little deeper
For sure.
to get some of the good stories out of them that, many that they, maybe had never told before. So there's a lot of crafting that goes into documentaries, I think probably more than people realize sometimes. And I always say, especially with documentary, I'm making a movie, but it's their life, it's their livelihood. And so it's up to me mostly to listen and pay attention. And your subjects or your people who know the world best will tell you what's important and how they feel and how it needs to be represented. So that's kind of the key thing for me in documentary is you want to get it right. You want to reflect how they feel about the world. And that was the coolest part when we finished and we had a screening and some of the stunt women came, and Melissa Stubbs, who's featured at the end of the film, who's breaking a lot of ground as a second unit director and stunt coordinator. She told me, and she was very emotional about it. She said, other people have talked about making a film on this topic and have wanted to, but she told me, you really nailed it. This is really who we are, and this is really how we feel. And, to have her tell me that, I was just like, that's really all I need. That's the objective, to make them, if they feel like I got it right, then I'm very proud.
Well, and I think that's something that really stood out for me because, there have been documentaries about behind the scenes in Hollywood ad nauseum, and there's been it's been covered every which way but loose, and there's a lot of them that have a certain overly glossy sheen to them. This one felt really a lot more honest and a lot more earnest. And while you were obviously trying to get the good stories and the fun stories, you got the stories that had a little bit of warts on them as well. How important was it for you to sort of not just get sort of the glamoury fun stories, but also the difficult ones about just not about sort of internal struggles and even people dying on set and just sort of having to sort of witness that in this profession?
Yeah. I think part of that might just be me. I don't know. But I kind of feel like if I'm going to cover a topic and even with other documentaries I've done, like, for example, drive-in movie theaters, I'll give you an example that a lot of drive-ins went through a phase, kind of in the 70s where a lot of them were playing XXX rated films.
Right.
And a lot of drive-in owners don't want to really bring that up because their family operated, their family audiences today. That phase isn't what exists. But I told them, that is part of the history. That is what kept a lot of drive-ins alive. And they knew it. And a lot of their drive-ins had once been XXX, or other drive-ins their family owned might have been, or whatever. So it was absolutely part of the history. And I just told them, if I'm going to tell the whole history, we need to cover the warts and all. We need to be honest and authentic with that story and cover the things that, maybe don't usually get talked about. And they were okay with that. And they told me I had integrity and they trusted me to tell the story. And that was the first documentary I made. So I've taken that with me. And that's the same approach with the Stuntwomen documentary. Was I felt like, there have been issues with this profession, and especially with women and people of color, and the struggle that they've had in this profession. And like you said, the fact that sometimes people have died in this profession, and those are all very sensitive things. And so it was, how do you handle that? With honesty and with integrity. And, like I said earlier, in the way that they need it to be told, because they're all still working. So, we need to keep it fair. But we have to tell the truth. And so I hope that's what we achieved in the film, is sort of, going a couple, not just one layer below the surface, but a couple layers below the surface to tell the reality, to tell the honesty of the story, but to do it in a way that everybody, felt, was respectful.
Oh, no, totally. And I mean, I think because just to focus on a specific point, just when you mentioned sort of the drug use on set in the 70s, which, as a fan, as a cinephile, of course, it was the 70s, people were doing drugs, but I never sort of connected the line with, oh my God, they were doing stunts while they were doing drugs? Oh, shit. Like, how much of do you think it was part just sort of indicative of the time, or was it just a question of because it was women doing the stunts and they didn't care, or because there's obviously going to be these moments of sort of carelessness or sort of accidents on set, but in the 70s it felt a little more renegade.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we showed that era in the film, and some of the women that were there working in the 70s and pushing for their piece of the pie. And I think people using, cocaine mostly in those years, I think it was just pervasive in life, and especially in Hollywood at that time. A favorite doc of mine is The Kid Stays in the Picture. I don't know if you've seen that one about Robert Evans, and he has all those chapters of how the cocaine got him in his career. and so I think it was just, especially pervasive in the industry. And a lot of the people that were involved with that, and that, for example, Julianne Johnson talks about, were very big, very respected stunt men in the industry. So it wasn't, it wasn't a bad thing. It was just something they did.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. It does.
I think it just reflects the era. Now, did that create unsafe situations? You would have to say it must have. Yeah. And certainly there are, there were time periods where more people were being injured in films, doing stunts than there are today. But there's still accidents and problems that happen today. So, yeah, good question. Complicated.
Can you talk a little about just getting Michelle involved? Because especially from an actor standpoint, she really does feel like sort of that perfect hybrid of actor, stunt woman, who was almost sort of trying to ride that line, because I love just how the film brings out that, they're not just doing a stunt, they're being a character they're being an actor doing a character doing the stunt.
Yes. So Michelle got involved because she has been an advocate for stunt people. We saw some stuff online that she had done. There was one of the Fast and Furious movies where apparently the stunt people were not listed in the credits of the film, and then they were not allowed to come to the premiere. And she spoke up that that's not right, how important the stunt people are to that franchise. And so she's been very vocal, and she doesn't like actors who claim they do their own stunts when they don't. So she has a lot of passion about it. Why would you want to take credit for somebody, who's risking their life to make you look good? So she had a lot of passion about the topic. And she also, as just is a feminist and really supports and loves, women. And so she was all about this topic. And it was cool to have her involved. She does the narration. She's an executive producer. And then we figured out, what are some great ways to, have her on screen. And the sequence that we shot when we went out to Debbie Evans' house, Debbie has done all of her driving in the previous Fast and Furious films, but they only worked together on the first one when it was a smaller film and a smaller budget. All the others, Debbie's usually in the second unit and Michelle's in the first unit. And so that was really interesting. So to sort of put them in the car together was really fun. And Debbie's son does the drift car racing, chasing them. He's also a stunt man. He drove in the last Fast and the Furious movie also. And Debbie's husband is a stunt man, so he did my stunt coordinating, and we had, a ton of cameras on him, and I got to shoot a real, drift car chase action sequence for a documentary. And that was a blast. And Michelle had a lot of fun doing it. So she was great to work with, and it's a topic that she's very passionate about.
I mean, you shot it quite well, just saying, but it looked great.
Thank you.
Now, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into my next question, because, I mean, obviously these days we're in such a unique time, and especially in the last few years, we've been getting more of a democratization towards not only making sure that people of color, women are getting more jobs, but also in recognizing so many of the aspects of filmmaking that haven't necessarily gotten appreciated for years, much like stunt work. And I'm kind of curious, in your research, do you think there was like a turning moment or a turning movie that maybe sort of went, this is too good that we can't sort of not recognize stunt people going forward?
I don't know about a turning point movie. I mean, I think what you're saying, being a woman director, I've been paying attention to this for years, obviously. And I think some of the challenges were that if you look at the statistics, they really had not changed much from the 70s until the present.
Yeah.
In terms of women directing films. And once there was data gathered that people could have not just anecdotal conversations, but could really have conversations around actual facts and data, and look at, that it's not individuals trying to discriminate, that it really is systematic. And so we are seeing people now trying to make sure that there's more equity and more opportunities for women and people of color. And we're seeing some of the needles move a little bit. But especially, I would say, in the last, maybe even a whole decade, that you are seeing a lot more female-driven content, whether that's on television with, like Supergirl or whatever, or in films, all the Marvel films. We just had Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman. There is a lot of female-driven content, and the more that there is on camera, then the more jobs it creates for stunt women behind camera. And a lot of people believe that, that content is more honest and better if it's also directed and written by women who understand those points of view. So I think there's a lot of discussion around that. There's a lot of movement. It's the right thing to do. And hopefully, it continues.
For sure, absolutely. Now, I mean, I guess that kind of dovetails into my next question. For you as a filmmaker, how do you sort of see yourself? Like, are you a documentarian, or is there sort of a dream for $100 million budget movie someday? Because, especially from a director's standpoint, like, we can see people do small budget films, and then when they take a big jump and maybe lose a little bit of control, and there's things that don't necessarily work as well as they should, the movies don't turn out as well. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, does it come down to sort of confidence in oneself, or just being able to tell the story the right way, or having the certain freedoms to tell the story the right way?
Well, the first film I ever directed was a narrative film. So I have worked the whole time, both in narrative and documentary. It's just easier to get documentaries done as a woman traditionally, but hopefully that's changing because they are lower budgets. But I do want to make bigger films. I love genre. I would love to make $100 million budget film. Absolutely. And that has been part of, what we were talking about a minute ago, sort of the systematic issues. There are so many examples of male filmmakers who made, one independent feature, and then next thing you know, they do have that, $100 million budget film. And meanwhile, women who are peers that maybe, say they both had films at Sundance, the female does not get an agent after that being in Sundance. And then she takes, maybe 10 years to get her next film or whatever. There's just a system that traditionally has pulled the guys in and pulled the guys up faster. And a lot of people are focused on that now and trying to figure out, how can we take the talented women when they're at the same starting point? How can we pull them into that system more equally? So I know, I'm a go-getter, and a lot of the other women directors I know are go-getters. So it's hard for us to believe in our head that we're discriminated against and that we're not giving those opportunities, because how can that be possible? I'm fully capable. But when you look at the statistics and how bad they've been for all these years, and the fact that sort of women don't have the same channels into the industry that the men seem to have, you can see it in the numbers, and you're like, oh, wow, I guess we really have been systematically discriminated against. So, but, like I said, that's changing now. We're seeing the numbers changing. A lot of other female director friends I've seen are getting opportunities, are directing television. So I think things are changing in a positive way. But yeah, it's been much easier for men to get pulled into a bigger budget film.
No, and you're absolutely right, because I mean, at the end of the day, there is no difference between a Patty Jenkins or a Ryan Coogler. It's just the work that gets done on screen, and that's really
Yeah.
what has to be the benchmark of how people get jobs and people move forward.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, I
Yeah.
mean,
And Ryan, you just mentioned, obviously Ryan Coogler and Patty Jenkins have directed huge films, a man of color and a female, and they've probably outperformed many of the others. So, yeah.
for you as a storyteller, because, and this is something I'm always really kind of curious about, especially these days where we're inundated with content, and especially now, given what's going on with COVID, we're all staying home a lot more. So it's all, streaming, VOD, theatrical, everything has been democratized, and it's on a very similar level. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective as sort of a filmmaker and a storyteller, how do you sort of navigate that balance to make sure that, A, you're going to make something that is sort of satisfying to you creatively versus the need to, like, okay, this is going to get sold because there's a market for this?
I think I'm always conscious of both. Even in my documentaries, I think you can kind of see drive-ins, movie palaces, Stuntwomen. I've also shot one that I haven't edited yet about a traveling carnival. Um, so a lot of documentaries are social issue documentaries. And I wouldn't know how to make that kind of documentary, although I think all my documentaries are full of subtext and social commentary.
Sure.
But I don't lead with that. I lead with something that's commercial and that's fun and thinking about finding the audience, and then the messages are tucked in there. So that's more my style and way of doing it. And I feel the same about my narrative filmmaking, that I try to make things that are going to attract an audience and be interesting, and maybe some world or some type of person that they haven't explored before. And I'll, of course you make everything because you have something to say. So that'll be in there, but I definitely try to lead with something that's going to have a hook and be more commercial, is kind of the way I like to do it.
Do you think that's sort of the key these days? Because I mean, especially when you look at some of the sort of, grand scale Marvel movies and those kind of big action things, there is that entertainment value, but they're well done, and there is a little bit of a message there, and it's managing to straddle sort of those important creative lines, and those things are rising to the top. Do you think for like any sort of storyteller, that's sort of the key to be able to sort of ride that razor's edge balance?
Yeah. And I always say, just kind of at the end of the day, what is it about? What are you trying to say? How do you want people to feel? And kind of, nailing your landing. I think that's the thing. And if you want to do that by the end of the film, it's all the, in the DNA of the film throughout, sort of how you're setting it up. You're setting everything up, and you're in every scene, and every shot, the way you're doing it, it's all subtly communicating something that adds up to something by the end. And it is hard because it's a collaborative art, but as the director, you're trying to influence as many of those decisions as you can to sort of keep that DNA on track, so that, so that by the end people feel it.
Sure.
So yeah, I do, in my opinion, I do think that's one of the keys to making a good film.
Now, I mean, I guess just to start putting a bow on this, in this business, it's a unique business because we all come into it, no matter what our angle is, we all started as fans. And I'm kind of curious, was there a film or a moment for you personally that went, okay, this is what I want to do?
Well, I did grow up in a movie family, and my parents watched films, talked to us about films, what was good about them. My dad had an 8mm camera, and we had, a reel-to-reel editing equipment, so we kind of were aware of filmmaking and process always. And there were times in my life, this was back when movies used to be in the ads in a newspaper, where we would open the newspaper and just be like, okay, I've seen every single film out there, every single big film, every single little film. So I have been a huge consumer and educating myself about film my whole life. If I had to say, like, my favorite film is Rocky. And I think for many levels, first of all, just because it's, it was made on such a low budget and it kind of came out of nowhere and won the Oscar. Also, Sylvester Stallone's story of how he wrote it and stuck with it. And the story of the film, that he was an underdog and had a chance. And, so that's my favorite film of all time. If I had to name one. Now, was that the thing that made me think I can make films? I don't know. I mean, I guess I always knew I would do something in the film industry. I wasn't sure I would direct, but when I was on, I knew I would eventually, put it that way. I knew I would direct eventually, and I write and I edit. So I dabble in a lot of different areas right now at this point.
Now, how do you think sort of that desire to self-educate helps people going forward? Because I mean, a lot of times, and I mean, in the 90s, we all saw the story of Tarantino working at the video store, and then he did Reservoir Dogs. And now people people have lost the video store and now just want to go see those Tarantino movies and think it's the same thing. And really it's not. How do you feel the need for self-education in the film industry drives you as a filmmaker and a storyteller?
Well, I'm still doing it now. I mean, you can go down different rabbit holes, basically. Like, if you find an actor you like, then you might want to see more of their films. If you find a director you like or a writer you like, you start looking at their films. And I have a few holes. There are some, I haven't seen a lot of Westerns, but I've started watching more Westerns recently. And there are a lot of classic films that I keep a list, and I find those online if I can find them. I actually still get the Netflix DVDs delivered because there's a bunch of films that aren't digital.
Yeah.
And I personally have hard media. I have a big collection of DVDs and even some VHSs because they were favorite films of mine that never got converted to DVD. They're only available on VHS. So I watch and rewatch, and I'm always trying to catch up with historic films in my education. But also I do programming for Sundance Film Festival.
Okay.
When I first got into this industry about 15 years ago, I started working for Sundance, and I've been doing, as a contractor, I do program. So I'm not full time there, but I'm an associate programmer. And for 15 years, I have watched feature films for Sundance to help select what gets programmed at the festival. And so that's a huge education right there. Every year I watch hundreds of Sundance films so I can see what are people doing, what are people making films about. So I'm immersed in it.
And you're not alone. I got a big collection myself, and you're right. The need to go down those rabbit holes really is such a driving sort of creative influence to the entire industry that a lot of people don't necessarily recognize off the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what? That's it for me today. And, I just want to say thank you again for the time and congratulations again on the movie. I absolutely enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. It makes me so happy to hear that. And this was a very interesting conversation. You got into depth on a lot of the topics. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I try. So